Hello, my name is Ann Cereghino, and I am going to give you my brief overview on my crew evaluation for the section of the library that I looked at. As a brief sort of overview of everything, I do not have access to a school library. So instead, I focused on my local library. My local library is one of 13 libraries that makes up the LINCC, we call it Link, Libraries in Clackamas County catalog. So I was kind of in a tough spot because I either was going to look at just my library, which was extremely limited, or I was able to look at all 13 libraries together as part of the consortium. And then I just decided that it would be more effective to look at it as a whole because there was more titles and more books to look at that way. There are 1,227 items in this search, and my search was limited to science fiction at the young adult level. So I limited it to science fiction. Once I got those results, then I could narrow it down even further to the YA level. As a general overview, I found that there were a lot of varied titles and dates. So there were a lot of classic titles for science fiction. So there were things like Fahrenheit 451, War of the Worlds, those kinds of things. But there were also a lot of new titles. It was interesting because the dates were mostly very old or a lot in the last 10 to 20 years, and especially in the last 10 years. The genre of science fiction being written particularly for the young adult level is something that has really grown in publishing in the last 10 to 20 years, and that's definitely reflected in what I found in this collection. Relevancy, the titles were all relevant. Science fiction was in the genre field of all of the mark records. I will be honest and say I didn't look at all 1,227 of them, but the ones that I did look at, it was all a part of that. And reading the descriptions, it seemed like they all needed to be part of this collection. Condition was difficult for me to be able to evaluate simply because it was an online search, but I will say that I have been to my local library and I have seen books there, and they all seem to be of very good condition. I've never gotten a book that wasn't in good condition. So I'm apt to believe that most of them were probably in good condition. As far as number of copies, one of the things that's really interesting about this is because it's a consortium, there would sometimes be like 8 copies of Fahrenheit 451, but there's 13 libraries. And so sometimes some libraries would have no copies and other libraries would have 2 copies. But it didn't really seem like there were a lot of instances where there were libraries that had too many copies of something. It didn't seem like this is one of those situations where, oh, Prince Harry wrote a memoir, so we have 100 copies of it between these 13 libraries. It was mostly in that like 8 to 12 range if there was a lot, but even then it was split over those 13 libraries. For thinking about managing this section of the collection, I would mostly focus on the circulation record of the materials. The reason I think I would do that is because it seems like there's a good number of titles, and especially with the ones there've been so many that have come out in the last 10 to 20 years, as I mentioned, that I think kind of evaluating those and seeing, okay, were the more modern science fiction titles from the last, say, 15 years ago, are they circulating as well as the new ones and the really classic ones? So I would probably look at it from that perspective, focusing on weeding them just for circulation. And then also looking at that and then saying, okay, where is my funding going to go for future purposes? Because YA science fiction is getting bigger. And so just making sure to be mindful about, do I need to put more money in this collection? Is it actually circulating as well as I think it is? So I would be looking for that. In terms of removal, it did not appear from my search of the collection that there were titles that needed to be removed. It looked like all of them were acceptable in terms of what the covers looked like, the kinds of things that were involved in the science fiction. It didn't seem like there was any fantasy mixed in there or historical fiction or anything like that. So nothing stood out glaringly to me that would be needing removal. And then finally, has this been effectively weeded? I think so. I think could it be weeded even further? Yes. I mean, I don't have the information as far as what the circulation is for the titles, so that's difficult for me to answer. But from an outside perspective, it looks like that they've done a good job of kind of having a really broad section of the collection devoted to YA science fiction, and there seem to be a lot of the relevant, important, classic, new titles involved. So I think so. All right, that was my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention.